Hi, this is Bruce Rawles, and I'm speaking again with Dr. Bob Rosenthal. And we've been going through his wonderful new book, From Nevermind to Evermind. And the last couple of weeks, we've talked about, yay, the first two chapters in his book. And this third one is really kind of a wonderful change of focus in going to touching Evermind, the perfect moment. And it kind of introduces us to I guess what we could call the course's version of epiphanies and those truly beyond magic, I think, experiences where we touch the heart of what A Course in Miracles is hinting at all along, that there's a peace that transcends anything we could possibly imagine. But we get glimpses of it, don't we? And so, anyway, would you like to make some opening remarks on what inspired this chapter? And you gave three wonderful examples and at the beginning.
Of the thank you.
Yeah.
This is. I'd like to give a little bit of background. I always find it fascinating when authors share a little bit about their process. So originally, I had intended this to be the first chapter. And I started writing it, and at a certain point, I realized that I was immersing the reader in too much of an experience without building a context for it. As the second chapter was all about, we process things in terms of contrast and context. And so then I kind of put it aside in a very incomplete form and thought about what needed to come first. And then that led to those first two chapters, which are essentially a deconstruction of the ego's view of what is the self and a deconstruction of the ego's view as what is perception. What is the world that we think is there outside of us? So after making, I think, a fairly solid case that self and the world are both unreliable ego constructs, I was like, oh, now, all right, this is the perfect place to then get into what is the experience or a taste of the experience like when we actually are able to open the doors of perception, as the Aldous Huxley's book title suggests, or deconstruct self enough that nevermind is shoot off to the side, and we actually get a breath of evermind coming in. A Course in Miracles is, very, very clear many times, but particularly I think at the beginning of the clarification of terms, that its goal is not to teach you theology or some philosophy that, you can go around and spout and look, all intellectual and smart about. It's about an experience. It's, and the beautiful thing about experience, and I think I addressed this in the book, at least I hope I do, is once you have it, it's yours. If you, I'm trying to think of, often I find that people try to tell me, oh, well, you don't understand X, Y, or Z. You don't understand A Course in Miracles because, no, the world really is real and God made it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if that's your experience, that's fine. But it's not my experience. And therefore, having had that experience, there's a certainty that can never be taken from you. And following on that experience, your trust that what A Course in Miracles is teaching us is accurate and true, your trust grows. And from that trust, there follows more experience. And from that experience, you gain greater trust. And this is how this is how the learning proceeds. So this isn't just true for the kinds of events that I describe in this chapter, which would more commonly be called mystical experiences. It's also true for miracles. When you're stuck and you see no way through, and suddenly you let it go and give it to the Holy Spirit, and your perception about something shifts, and you allow perception to be corrected, and boom, the problem doesn't exist anymore. That's pretty compelling stuff. So it was in that spirit that I wanted to offer this before getting back into, all right, what is never mind, what is ever mind, and who are we really? And that what I find to be the profound insight that I try to share in chapter 5, which we already discussed in our first talk about this book. We'll have to figure out whether we want to go back and do that again, or do something else. So yeah, this chapter is kind of like, all right, if you move ego self, never mind, off to the side, because it's very hard to get rid of completely while we're still here. The practice section of chapter 2, I think, tried to demonstrate how to quiet ego mind, but also its persistence. But when we can push it off to the side and make space, make room for the invitation to the Holy Spirit, then this is the kind of experience we can have. And I gave 3 examples from my own life. Interestingly, they were all from very early on, before I started doing A Course in Miracles, and before I'd met, then Judy Scutch and now Judy Whitson. But they're just such striking examples. And, and as I say in some place in the chapter, it would be hard for me to give you an example of that now, because anytime that I take the time to really go inward, when I come back out, that is how the world feels. Okay, maybe it's not so suffused with light as, a genuine quote unquote mystical experience, but there's a palpable sense, and this is really important. There's a palpable sense of unreality, because our sense of what's real has been transcended, but there's an equally powerful, and actually even more powerful, sense of reality with a capital R, because what we're allowing to come in is so much more real than the world of perception. So it's this very strange kind of, double-edged or double-sided sense of, oh my God, nothing's real, and yet the experience itself is so real that when it kind of starts fading out, no question, it's more real than anything here, anything you've imagined. And I try to make the case that once you've experienced it, yeah, that's where you want to be. It's better than winning the Super Bowl. It's better than having that male or female or gender neutral or whoever it is person finally tell you that they love you after you've been pursuing them for 12 years, or, there's no experience in this world that can match it, precisely because it's an experience in this world, which is a world of illusion and keeps us running, and I talk about this, later on, but if you've lived long enough, you've certainly had the experience where something you wanted very, very much actually comes your way, and you're giddy and delighted, ... for a while, because every one of those fades and peters out and leaves you going, oh, is that all there is? Well, what's next? But not a mystical experience. That they're complete in and of themselves, because they are windows onto eternity. So yeah, there's the short version of the chapter.
Yeah, and since we happen to be recording this on Valentine's Day in 2019,
that's right.
And so happy Valentine's Day. It's
to you too.
To me, it seems very appropriate that I know your whole another whole book, I think, is going to be devoted to special relationships, but it's certainly since you're it's kind of hard to write anything about the Course without talking about the obstacles to peace and how we have to get those out of the way, or turn the volume down on the ego's ticker tape chatter, or whatever metaphor comes to mind. But certainly, the experience of, like you say, having supposedly achieve some goal in the world that involves others, whether it's a relationship goal or a career strategy that you've finally has paid off, or some kind of a financial thing, or some sort of health goal, or all the different things in the world that seem to be things that we strive for. And then you in your exercise in the back of the chapter list all the things that we preoccupy ourselves with that are examples of standing in the way, typically, the ego's constant propaganda machine of saying, well, you can't have a mystical experience just right now. You need to attend all these things, and irrespective of the fact that you can actually chew gum and walk, to use a familiar phrase. We actually can stay in with practice a more and more peaceful state that has that, if you will, mystical quality to it, by remembering that it's not about the outcome; it's about my choice of teacher at any given moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that, okay, so within the ego's world of form and perception, we strive, we want to get. There's something out there that we believe we don't have, and we try to chart a course that will allow us to obtain that elusive something, and make it ours. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. And here's the sad thing: when we make it ours, we tend to make it part of our identity.
Right.
So, in our last talk, I used the metaphor of sort of a beach construction with a lot of driftwood and, crap from the ocean and flotsam and jitsam, and we put it all together, and that's the self-concept. We do this with the things that we get. Oh, I'm Tom Brady. I'm married to, whatever her name is, Gisele Bundchen. I've won 6 Super Bowls. All of these things glom onto the identity and ossify it. They lock it in and actually make it more difficult to have that opening that is the mystical experience. So there's this paradox that everything the world values will get in the way. I mean, there's that beautiful line in the text that says, everything the ego, everything you think you want will hurt you, or everything the ego thinks it wants will hurt you. And the first time you come on it, it's like, wow, I don't understand that. But that's what it's saying. It will hurt you because you're actually putting up, as you said, another obstacle to peace. So the path to achieving that mystical vision, if you will, it's not a path of doing. It's not something you can, make a 5-year plan for, or buy a best-selling book and, all right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to use my affirmation every morning. That's for the things of this world. A Course in Miracles is so clear. It's about undoing. So in that practice that you were referring to at the end of the chapter, I thought, well, how can I help people practice getting to this? And it's like, well, you can't, but you can help them look at what might be blocking them from getting this. And so I tried to come up with all of the things that in my own experience block me from that. The little things that my ego voice comes in and starts yammering and chattering in my head saying, well, no. I mean, even today, I've been doing this for 43 years and more because I had mystical experiences before I came into the Course, and I'll still sit down, do a workbook lesson, get to this lovely place where, I could just stay here forever because it is forever. And that little voice goes, yeah, but you better check your email.
Oh, I can so relate, as you can imagine. Yeah. And at the same time, there's a residual quality of that piece that has a pull-through effect with that basically, the more we do it, the more it's like there's this kind of growing baseline of peace that carries through. And I think that is really what kind of gradually lifts us out of the compulsive identification with things in the world that whether it's a Tom Brady example or more subtle things. It doesn't have to be the superstardom. It can just be, I have this story. It can be and it can be a pretty mundane story, but by golly, it's my story. And to the degree that we're identified with a story, whether it seems to be a glorious one or a horrific one or any combination of qualities, as long as it roots us in a specific identity, that's basically the fodder for ego's warfare.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah.
I mean, just to be clear, I'm not advocating, and I'm pretty sure you're not advocating this idea that we jettison our personality somehow. I mean,
Of
No,
course, of course.
you
Yeah.
come in with certain givens.
Right.
You
Right.
can't get rid of your body, because, well, you can, but I wouldn't advise it. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anyone else.
Right. Right.
The Course says denial of the body is a particularly unworthy form of denial. It's here,
Mm-hmm.
but we can stop valuing it or believing that it has the ability to get us something that we want,
Right.
which gets
Right.
us right into specialness.
Yep.
The idea that we can be special if only we get X, Y, or Z, or the flip side, we're special because we've suffered more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That person, but I've recovered from 6 forms of cancer, escaped from 3 prisoner of war camps, and yeah, there are people who've had horrible lives, but how do you wear it? And to me, we can, we can come through any experience, no matter how wonderful or how negative, and ultimately recognize that it was there to help us grow.
Exactly.
And so I picked Tom Brady mainly because if I try to think of someone whose life sounds like it's just gone perfectly, he'd be my guy. But then, there is that old Simon and Garfunkel song, Richard Cory, where, this working man is singing about the multimillionaire who owns these factories in his town and is so rich and has orgies on his yacht, and he must be happy, but I work in his factory and I hate the life I live. And, and at the end of the song, and Richard Cory went home one night and put a bullet through his head. But I work in his factories and we don't know what the inside of anyone's life is like.
Right.
And the fact is, to the extent that life is to the extent that life is being led in pursuit of an ego goal, there's going to be suffering and misery somewhere.
Right.
I think that, to me, the ultimate take home, and I think this was, this is the Buddha's first noble truth: all life is suffering or dissatisfaction. Even if you had the perfect life, everybody you love is going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not hell, I don't know what is.
Right. And the Course's response to that is that's one of the most outrageous ideas, that you can lose someone or something you love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's like, wow, it puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? A moment ago, when you're talking about, the seemingly wonderful, in the world's terms, life, and then the seemingly horrible, and the 3 Holocaust or I was thinking of one of my favorite, and it's hilarious, skits, the Monty Python's troupe did with the 4 Yorkshiremen. Have you seen that one?
I was thinking of the one where they're cutting off the arms of the knight, and he's like, "Nope, I can still."
Oh, well, that's another great one too, for sure. Yeah, the Black Knight.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the 4 Yorkshiremen is these four of the Monty Python troupe are sitting around in their smoking jackets and comfortable chairs, obviously enjoying a fine, late in life kind of lifestyle, but they're reminiscing about, well, it wasn't always this easy, and in fact, when I was a kid, we had this such and such and such, and then each one, escalates in a downward spiral. Well, you were lucky, they almost all start with, you were lucky. I had to, finally the last one is, something like, we had to, get up at 3 hours before we went to sleep, and my father would kill me 3 times before breakfast, and all we had was a lump of, oh, you were lucky to have a lump of coal, and you were lucky to have a shoebox. We didn't have a shoebox, and we had to, sleep in a hole in the gutter, and then that kind of thing. But it just goes on and on. But it's just kind of an example of how no matter how you slice or dice the experience in the world, there's always going to be something that is inadequate or lacking. And no matter, if you were the ruler of a galaxy, there'd be other galaxies that you
that's right,
hadn't conquered,
yes.
or whatever, so, but just watching that drivel, the kind of like the crawl on the screen, that there's the Holy Spirit's ticker tape, and then there's the ego's ticker tape, and it all depends on which one we listen to at any given moment. So
yeah, no, exactly.
And that the Holy Spirit's is always the one that leads to those perfect moments, those mystical experiences where we just we stop the the noise. You still kind of see it scrolling along, but it's like you no longer identify with it, it seems.
Yeah. Well, that's where I love the biblical phrase, being in the world but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the phrase, the peace that passeth understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you sort of use those two as your guideposts, you'll have a sense of what the perfect moment or the mystical moment is. And I'd like to say, I intentionally did not use the term holy instant that the Course uses, because the way I read it, the holy instant is a moment where your perfect communication with God is restored. And I think it's more akin to revelation. You know, I've heard people say, you know, oh yeah, you know, I was driving in my car on the freeway and I had a holy instant, and I'm like, I don't know that that would be safe in a car. I don't think Holy Spirit would let you do that. So that's why I chose
no little disclaimer,
the term,
you know, pull over if you're driving or operating heavy equipment, right? Yeah.
right. Don't try this in your car. You know,
Yeah.
but I'm sorry, I lost the train of my thought now. Oh yeah, this is why I called it a perfect moment.
Yeah.
But now I still lost that train of thought. Oh well. If you have a sense of where we were.
Well, I think your three examples that you start off of, you know, going out into nature and how that can be a trigger. I was relating to one where we were at the Kipahulu. We took the road to Hana and on the island, Big Island, Hawaii, and I was not expecting this at all. But I remember walking up through this bamboo grove up above the what they call the 7 sacred pools, I guess, and there was this bamboo grove, and it was like, it was sort of like this organic cathedral of these giant hollow wooden spires, and they were just so peaceful, and the wind was just still very gentle, but just enough to where these 30, 40, 50 foot tall, majestic, tropical ambassadors.
Wow.
We're just kind of making this gentle clanking sound, almost like this little chorus of a little song as we walked through this path through. And again, it was actually fairly dark through there because there was so much, not so much the foliage, but just the sheer mass of the trunks of these bamboo trees, and it was just kind of like this sort of mystical experience kind of thing, just for a few moments, and then I just kind of stopped and listened and felt this gentle breeze, and it's like one of those kind of things, but
yeah.
Anyway, at those moments you kind of suspend that personal sense of self. Another experience in the Great Pyramid, in what they call the King's Chamber, and what they call the sarcophagus, but I consider it just a granite box in the uppermost room, because that could be a whole other talk about the Egyptian lore. But I lay down this thing and started toning, and found like a 1,000-voice choir singing through me, but yet there wasn't anything remarkable about the acoustics were kind of interesting, but it was more the experience of kind of letting go of a sense of self, and then I realized I could tune into that feeling and that experience elsewhere, and it wasn't contingent on a quote unquote sacred site, that any place could be a sacred site, and then that began to extrapolate that to other places, and it's like, oh yeah. I had a similar experience years ago with a friend of mine who was a studio musician in Southern California, who got me into synthesizers because that was his thing, and then he said, well, you check out this little biofeedback machine. This was back in the mid 70s, and I tried this machine, and I could get into what they call an alpha state very quickly, and then I realized I don't need the machine. And I think A Course in Miracles is kind of on a similar approach, is the idea of having some specific experience that requires some particular circumstance or condition is really antithetical to, I think, what the Course is suggesting, is that if we can remember that we have the choice and the power in our mind at any given moment to choose the teacher of peace, that gives us the opportunity over time, with practicing that, to have a peaceful experience no matter what seems to be going on. So
Yeah, well, once again, the answer is never outside of us. It's
exactly,
always
exactly.
inside of us.
Yeah.
I specifically addressed this in this chapter. There is this temptation when you've had an experience like this to attribute it to the circumstances or the place that you were in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this nasty little compulsion to try to repeat it by
Right.
reestablishing those circumstances, and it
Mm-hmm.
almost never works.
Mm-hmm.
If only because now you're anticipating it and you're trying to get it out there.
Right.
One of the things, spontaneity is a huge part of what makes that mystical experience work. But it's kind of cool if you think about it, that there are so many ways that if we simply pause the inner dialogue and invite the Holy Spirit in, so many moments are laden with that potential for that sense of vision.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that we find it in nature frequently because nature offers these vistas, or the experience you were describing, these tall bamboo, um, spaces that dwarf our physical body and allow our minds to kind of embrace the whole vista in this very expansive way. That kind of says to us, you are more than you thought.
Mm-hmm.
The course in the section Beyond the Body from chapter 18, which I quote not once but twice in the chapter, says, yeah, it's an experience where you realize you're not confined to the physical body, and you actually start to join with what you thought was out there. And of course, when you start to join with it, it's no longer out there. It's a part of you, and that opens us up beyond the limits of what the ego thought it was. But don't kid yourself. You don't have to go to Tibet and climb the Himalayas to have this kind of profound experience. You can go out on your city block and stare at clouds or stare at a pattern of pigeon crap on the ground, and the potential is there because it's in you. It's not out there. As we said last time, lesson 29, God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. It starts here, and then it moves from there to, fill up our perception. So it's really important not to get caught up on, the circumstances or the trigger, although, sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need, okay, I've set it up in this way. I'm going to this workshop with this absolutely amazing special human being. But as you said, Bruce, once you've had the experience, once that's in there, it's yours, and you can replicate it in other circumstances because you know what it feels like. In other words, it begins to generalize. Why does it generalize? Because it's truth. You're not going to get rid of it. It is more real than anything else. So it starts to pop up in these other places. And that's as it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
That's as it should be.
Yeah. The generalizing is again, that seems like that's because the course, even though it seems like, it's positioned as, there's a workbook that's only got 365 lessons, so that a lot of people say, oh, well, I did the course, I did the workbook,
Yeah.
I did it that year.
This course is only a beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, it seems like it takes quite a while, and I think, I know you've probably been studying it about a decade longer than I have, but it still is, several decades later, it's like, wow, I think I'm finally beginning to get an idea that if I can really, listen to what it's saying, and it says, you're much too tall and your mind wandering, and catch myself, making a big deal out of something that isn't a big deal. Then I can have more of those little mini mystical moments by just letting go of. It doesn't mean I'm not doing things. It just means that I'm not invested in the outcome, and I still, I'm going to do the same things I would do otherwise.
Well, we're here talking, when we need computers and monitors that we have to pay for to do that, et cetera.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, the goal isn't that. The goal becomes that inner peace and carrying that wherever you go. Joining with others in relationships, joining with the world of perception, as opposed to splitting off from it by seeing differences or specialness.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that brings up another category of experiences that, if we need to rely on a training wheel, I think, joining with other people, even though the Course says, there's no one else out there ultimately, but doing that with the intention of seeing everyone as your savior, everyone is your long lost best friend, and recognizing that in truth, that's absolutely accurate, becomes a wonderful gateway back to a place where, we kind of disconnect from all the contingencies that we've,
Yes,
and the barriers that we've put place to peace.
and that's a good trailer moment for the next couple chapters in the book too.
Yeah.
Where I mean, in the next chapter, I'm sort of looking at our impulse to connect and join, as humans, and that's really what the whole second book is about. From loving one to one love, it's that recognition that we start off from a place of every relationship is a special relationship, because each one, we think each one gives us something particular. In a sense, they're all transactional, even though we don't want to look at them that way. And moving from that stance to a far deeper recognition where, we're all one, we're all in it together. I can't get out without you getting out too. Either we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and do it together, or we all fall apart and it gets pretty ugly. Guess which way the world's been going for most of its history. And guess what we can do to make that change? Not because of some altruistic impulse, but because it's what we all want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that really, truly makes us consistently happy and peaceful.
Yeah.
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 I was reminded of a quote from Ram Dass: "We're all walking each other home." I really like that one.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, because it really is just,
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's just, if we can remember that when we appear to be struggling, it's like, well, why not, help a friend and recognize that we're helping ourselves, and watch like you say, the altruistic motives that are truly there, and then see how ego wants to co-opt those and make it about the little less self, and
Yes.
just kind of sort those things out, and then the real genuine caring is beyond the special love and the special hate, and but it takes practice of just looking at the the ego's counterfeit, fraudulent motivations, catching them and just saying, that's not evil, sinful, or wicked. It's just silly, it's just
and
kind
it doesn't work.
It doesn't exactly from a very using science in its maybe highest aspects is saying, this just is a non-functional, zero efficacy technique.
Yes. I mean, if you're trying to build your house based on 2 + 2 = 5, or if you've got a ruler where, the inch marks are all different, it's not going to work out terribly well. Yeah. And that's where we live. We've tried to build that house, and I mean, the Course is so clear that it doesn't ask us to accept it on faith. If anything, it's just the opposite. That introduction to the workbook, tells us, just do the lessons. Don't judge them. You might actively disagree with them. Just don't make any exceptions and do them, and they'll show you that they're accurate, that they're true. And that's the only way that we can be let out of this, because it's the matrix is pretty compelling, like we talked about last time. It feels pretty real, and if you look at the number of infinite variations of things to want, and then start thinking about that in terms of the idea of other lifetimes. I did a lot of work once over the years at the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia. Bob Monroe wrote a book called Journeys Out of the Body, which I actually don't recommend because it was very fearful. But he also wrote a book called Far Journeys, which I do recommend.
Yes, that's a great one.
And, you know, one of the things that he talked about in Far Journeys was kind of this cycling of, you know, these spiritual beings that see this glowing energy ball that is, you know, call it the earth, but it's all of the energetics of the earth. And they go, woo, what is that? And they get closer, and then it's like, oh, I want to play in that sandbox. And they dive in, and they have some horrible lifetime. You know, they're abused, killed, murdered, impoverished because they don't know how to manipulate reality. And the next time they go, oh, I'm coming back as a really strong, you know, person, and they join an army, and then they're all ambushed and killed. And if you think about it, it's sort of like this is the path of karma. You know, all right, I made one choice, wasn't really good, didn't work out. Now I'm going to try to adjust and do something different. Oh, no, that didn't work out either. No. And we can do that for lifetime after lifetime, year after year. And at some point, to quote, you know, Bill Thetford, there must be a better way. Or to quote the Course, tolerance for pain may be high, but it's not without limit. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. So, you know, you take this path of karma within one life and probably in multiple lifetimes until you realize that there's this other path that cuts through all of it that says, oh no, you know, I've been trying to find water in a desert, and, you know, or as I say in From Nevermind to Evermind, you know, we're looking for our keys under a street lamp, but there really is no street lamp. There's no light, and that's not where we lost the keys in the first place. You know, so look once again, you know.
Exactly.
But as long as we're searching in this realm, we don't get the experience that practically shows us that this realm doesn't work, but that's not the end. You know, if that was the only place you got to, I mean, to me, that's kind of pure nihilism or maybe existentialism in its purest form. No meaning here. Do whatever you want. You're all going to be dead at the end, and end of story. But the Course is telling you that, but then it says, but that's not reality. And if you're following reality, here's this better way. And so in this chapter, I was just, you know, hoping to illustrate sort of the fruits of that better way when you first begin to perceive them. And as you said, being able to hold that sense of inner peace. I mean, you know, we both work for the Foundation for Inner Peace, which was a name that Helen Schuckman got from the Voice of Jesus. That's one of the goals, you know, as the ego sees it. Love might look different than inner peace, but no, they're just, you know, two facets of the same diamond. You know, that's the goal. So however we get to it, the circumstances don't matter. It's the experience, and then from that experience, building more trust. And as we both said, generalizing from it. You know, the Course is very clear. If we're all one mind, we have to learn that at the level of the individual minds, but then it starts to generalize. And, you know, forgiveness learned in one relationship becomes much easier to apply to other relationships. And hey, this is salvation. This is how we wake each other up. This is how we walk each other home, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of ties into one of the sections that you talk about in this chapter, is an expansive sense of self. And when we have an inclusive way of thinking, and I think a lot of those mystical experiences, even in maybe, you know, some of those more challenging lifetimes where it's all about the warfare and conquest and so forth, that, you know, there's got to be in every lifetime moments where, you know, people let down that ego guard and are confronted with, you know, there must be a better way. Even if that's pushed away, there's still that ever-present, eternal, infinitely patient voice within everyone. And I think that that reminder is basically, I think something that helps us develop tremendous compassion, not only for the so-called others, but ourselves, because we're all, fighting the same hard battle, and we're all wanting to go beyond the crazy shenanigans of the ego, and see that connection on a more regular and ideally on completely ongoing basis. And
yeah, that was one of the reasons I took that. I use a quote in this chapter from Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night. I could have pulled quotes from any number of mystics that kind of make the same point. But the play, which is autobiographical and in my mind, unquestionably O'Neill's best work, it's so depressing. It's, the mother is mentally ill, the father is an alcoholic and a braggart, and he could care less about anyone. The older brother is an alcoholic, if I recall. And yet, in the middle of all of this, the father and this youngest son, they're having this discussion and sharing, the father is being candid and sharing some of his regrets about the path he took in life, and he's not trying to con anyone or pull one over. And the character who represents O'Neill talks about, he's a sailor, and he talks about different mystical experiences he's had. These times where the clouds of suffering break up and you're just filled with love. He even uses the word God, albeit reluctantly, because, my God has such a bad reputation thanks to a formal religion. But I thought it was just such a beautiful little, I remember the first time I read it, I was awed, because here in the midst of, what might be one of the best depictions of just how bad the ego's world can be, is this beautiful little gem that soars free and tells us, no, there's more to it. There is a better way. Not there must be, there is.
Yeah, I suppose in every moment, even if it isn't a rock bottom, face down drunk in the gutter experience, but in every little disappointment, there's an opportunity to say, oh, I could see peace instead of this. I could, I'm not upset for the reason I think. I'm actually, upset because I'm seeing something that's not there through the lens of a distorted, seemingly silly separate sense of self.
Yes.
that is just, a misunderstanding that I don't have to identify with once I recognize there's a real alternative.
That's right. And, it's kind of like in the 12-step world, there's this term hitting bottom, and I actually wrote quite a bit about it in my first book, From Plagues to Miracles, because I kind of view that the 10th plague as that point where, okay, there's no going forward, either you change or you die. So hitting bottom is a very interesting concept because it is not carved in stone, 10 Commandment metaphor, sorry. Where one, I think I say in that book, one drunk's bottom might be, wow, I really said something inappropriate at that party. I'd better watch my drinking. Someone else's might be, oh my God, I just killed an entire family while drunk in the car. That the bottom has nothing to do with external circumstances, really. It's that point at which you as a being recognize that the path you are on does not work. So it is that point practically of saying, all right, I've tolerated pain and my tolerance was high, but now I have to find that better way. Where that bottom point comes, some people suffer mightily, others seem not at all. They're just like, but we need, all of those ranges count. They're all valid, and they're all living within the ego's world of time. So in a sense, they're all illusion anyway. Whatever your particular path is all that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking as you're sharing that, I was thinking, that's one of the, I think, certainly for people new to the course and for those who are familiar with it, one of the more challenging ideas is that there's no order of difficulty in miracles. And that's, very, very first page of the text, very first principle. And it's like, well, if that's true, then something that seems horrific, for one person, that is just kind of like, just brush aside, kind of no big deal for someone else. But in a sense, anything that, the most small irritation is no different than raging fury, or whatever the quote
Yes.
goes, something like that. And that's kind of a reminder that anything that disrupts our peace of mind is basically choosing an identity that says, I don't want that mystical experience just this moment. And there's nothing wrong with that, but eventually, we'll get tired of that, and we'll want to have a more consistent, peaceful experience, and recognize that there is actually a way to do that, and it's by forgiving ourselves for the belief that was even possible, and that we were able to choose that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think maybe it's more difficult for someone like Tom Brady to wake up, because life does appear to be working so well. If it's working, why try to fix it? But I promise you, Tom Brady will have to retire someday. He won't be able to play football. He might open restaurants that aren't terribly good because, he's getting into that late. We are all, again, I come back to the Buddha's first noble truth, and his insights when he, as a young man, left the palace grounds, or so the myth goes, and sees what is it, a sick person, an aging person, and a corpse, and realizes these are inescapable. When you realize those are inescapable, then you better look somewhere else for happiness. So in a way, those places where we're suffering and where we haven't been able to get what we thought we wanted from the world outside, those actually are fairly profound opening or potential openings for going, wait a minute, choose once again. Not, okay, I tried that bar and I didn't find anyone there I liked, so let me try a different bar on the other side of town. I mean, you can try as many bars as you like, literally or metaphorically. They're all going to bar you from the truth. But recognizing that, I've been looking outward, I need to look inward. That's the ultimate take home, no pun intended.
Yeah. Also, what we were just sharing with reminded me of an idea that I think is evident in the course a lot, is that in the curriculum, the contrast between the insanity of the ego and the peace of the Holy Spirit is really brought forth dramatically in pretty much every section. If there's no kind of little timid tiptoeing around, and sometimes the language is so graphic, it's like, my gosh. And yet when you read it, you realize, there really is either this profound peace or this complete absence of it. And we cover over the absence with all kinds of, effectively narcotics, cosmetics, diversions, camouflages, propagandas of every sort. I'm just throwing a bunch of words out, but all the different strategies that the ego uses to try to make its horrific lack of peace more palatable. But eventually, we all come to this, like, hey, none of this is working. I really want that sustainable peace, that those truly perfect moments, and I want them to be more than just a moment, and I want them to be able to be strung together and eventually have nothing but that, and that's what our curriculum suggests is not only possible but inevitable, that experience.
Yeah, and I mean, for myself, that was one of the big obstacles to starting the course, was that that stark counterpoint. There's truth, light, love, and then there's what isn't, which is illusion, but which feels real to us. And as you were talking, I was thinking, we try to live in this middle zone, 50,000 shades of gray, if you will, and trying to convince ourselves that no, these are these are real, when really they're just variations on darkness, and we need to wake up to light.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Vision that leaves one person out of a perfect innocence and perfect oneness is not real vision, right?
No, it's not real vision. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's why those mystical experiences, tend to be, filled with accounts of where I couldn't, find any fault with anyone or anything,
Yeah.
and the language, of course, can vary widely, but there's always that quality to it of not needing to defend or about the only thing that maybe sort of after the fact a tendency, it seems, was maybe to share the experience, and even that falls short, because a lot of times the
Yeah.
quality of that is ineffable, and but the
Hard to get it in words. Yeah.
yeah, the quality I think comes across is that the more we find the peace, whether it's through a study group or our own reading, or just day-to-day practice, when we recognize that gee, I could actually do what I'm doing and listen to my inner kindness teacher and have fun without being attached to the outcome, by just watching the contents of my mind and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Eventually that starts paying off, and being you find yourself more and more peaceful, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the experience, we've talked about how it can be triggered by, beautiful vistas. I talk about, I sort of catalog a number of other ways that it comes to us. But sometimes it really, the mystic does show up in the most unexpected places.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking specifically about, Helen Schuckman's mystical experience, known as the subway experience, where she hated taking the subway, thought of it as, all of these smelly, horrible people. And one day had to take it with her husband, and she's down there just like, oh, get away. And the car fills with light. And this predated A Course in Miracles by quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And, when she sees a priestess sort of kneeling, and, there it is. A New York City subway car becomes, one of the holiest spots on earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you were saying earlier, Bruce. Every place is potentially a holy place.
Exactly.
We make it that, or we prevent it from being that. It's our call.
Yeah. Artificial constraints, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been really, really helpful and fun. Is there anything else that you wanted to share? I know there's a lot of things that you talked about here, like a pervasive sense of peacefulness, overwhelming unconditional love, total absorption in the moment, profound conviction of holiness, sense of presence. I mean, some of these things are just wonderful examples of the qualities of those experiences. I mean, maybe there's other things that.
Thank you.
That you want to share.
I'd like people to just check out the book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's really wonderful.
I do want to share one other thing, because it is Valentine's Day. So if you're interested, you being listeners, I put up on my YouTube channel a talk that I gave between Groundhog Day and Valentine's Day 3 years ago in 2016 that I'm particularly fond of. It goes into all the metaphor and such, but I think people will enjoy it.
Okay.
And what the little trailer moment I'll give is, yes, here we have this holiday that's all about special love. And it's dedicated, to the god Cupid, and it has some actually really horrible origins in the Roman holiday of Lupercalia or something, where men would knock women unconscious and drag them off for sex. I don't think there'd be a woman in the world who'd want a Valentine's Day card under those circumstances.
No.
But the central Greek myth, and myths are such powerful repositories of truth. The central Greek myth around the god Cupid, whom the Greeks called Psyche, is the story of Cupid and Psyche, or Amor and Psyche, where she sleeps at night, he falls in love with her, he someone takes his arrow, I think, and it hits her. No, he's hit with his own arrow, and she is the first woman he sees. That's right.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
But he is a god, so he can only visit her at night, and she doesn't know the identity of her real lover. And eventually, someone, I think it's maybe her sisters or some jealous god, convinces her, you have this demon visiting you, and you need to light a candle and trick him and see his true face. And she does this, and of course, the moment she sees his true face, she recognizes he's a god, but in that moment, he also disappears. I think it's a very, very wonderful, profound metaphor that special love occurs in darkness. We don't know the face of the other. And that face is actually the face of a God. We're all God. We're all really loving God. But when we try to capture that in the world of form by, I'm going to look on it and I want to know, who is this being who's really there? Another way of looking at it is special love thrives on fantasy, darkness. And when we penetrate the fantasy and go, all right, now I'm living with this character, who are they really? The whole charade falls apart. But what we don't often hear is the rest of the story, where I think it's the goddess Venus, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, assigns Psyche a series of tasks to perform, that in the course of performing them, she sort of comes into her own fullness as a woman. And from that place, she meets Cupid's Psyche again, and now their relationship is cemented, but at a level where it can be sustained. So self-knowledge, but I would put a capital S in there, is what allows us to really have that relationship with the God in others. But if you want to, it's only about a half-hour talk. I gave it as the message at a Unity Church in Asbury, New Jersey. But it was one of those that I had the most fun with. And so it being Valentine's Day, just thought I'd share it.
Yeah,
My
I'll
YouTube
look for it.
channel is,
It's
Robert Rosenthal, MD.
Okay. If I don't find it, I'll email you to get the link, and I'll put it on the post. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
That
great.
would be,
Look forward to seeing it. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Cool.
But yeah, so there's my Valentine's gift to anyone listening, even if you're not listening on Valentine's Day.
Excellent. Excellent. Any more concluding remarks? I mean, this is one of your shorter chapters, but there's still a lot in there.
There's a lot.
Needless to say.
Yeah, I've known people and counted myself among them at one point who just craved that mystical experience, and they're going to get it no matter what. It's a letting go process. Let yourself be surprised. If you try to determine the form, it may not work as well. And if you're strongly guided to a particular experience, like the King's Chamber at Giza, or the Monroe Institute, or what have you, trust that guidance, because sometimes we do need particular forms to help us loosen the constraints that the ego mind puts around us. Trust Holy Spirit. That would be my take home for just about anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Bob. And it's always fun to talk with you, and looking forward to the next conversation so we can.
Thank you, Bruce. It's
continue.
A delight. Thank you for hosting and making these available to so many people. I deeply appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay.